Record. So we missed a week or two, I don't remember, but last week was a major story, which was the story of the giving of the Torah, of the story at Sinai, and the Ten Commandments. And of course, it's a very important parsha, but we weren't able to do that. But this week is in some ways a continuation. And interestingly, the end of the parsha goes back, according to most opinions, goes back to the theme of the preparation of the giving of the Torah. So something is out of order. Last week we spoke about the giving of the Torah. This week is many laws. So primarily civil law. I would say almost all the civil law in the Torah is in this week's parsha. So it can get very technical and very detailed. But at the end of the parsha, for some reason, the Torah goes back to the description of the preparation for Sinai, which that itself is something we have to discuss. Why does the Torah tell the story in a fragmented way? Giving of the Torah, civil law, going back to the preparation for the giving of the Torah. So that's something we'll discuss. We'll also look at some of the civil law and maybe some of the spirituality behind the civil law. So we'll see where we end up. Here we go. The journey begins. We go, as is our custom, parsha in a nutshell. Here we go. So the name of the parsha, Mishpatim, means ordinances, and is found in Exodus 21. Following the revelation at Sinai, God legislates a series of laws for the people of Israel. These include the laws of indentured servant, the penalties for murder, kidnapping, assault, and theft, civil laws pertaining to redress from damages, the granting of loans, and the responsibilities of the four guardians, and rules governing the conduct of justice by courts of law. So this is, of course, very brief, but general categories of guardians, of torts, damages, and others are all included in this parsha. Also included are laws warning against mistreatment of foreigners, the observance of the seasonal festivals, and the agricultural gifts that are to be brought to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the prohibition against cooking meat and milk, and the mitzvah of prayer, and the mitzvah of prayer. Altogether, the parsha of Mishpatim contains 53 mitzvah, 53 commandments, 23 imperative commandments, sometimes called positive commandments, and 30 prohibitions. So if the Torah has 613 commandments, you get a nice chunk in this week's parsha, 53. God promises to bring the people to the land of it, the people of Israel, to the Holy Land, and warns them against assuming the pagan ways of its current inhabitants. Now we go back, as I mentioned, according to most opinions, this is actually going back to the previous story. The people of Israel proclaim, "We will do and we will hear," and all that God commands us. Leaving Aaron and Hur in charge of the Israelite camp, Moses ascends Mount Sinai and remains there for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the Torah from God. You may know the story. Hate to do the spoiler alert. Hate to do the spoiler alert. If what happens at the end of those 40 days and nights is that Moshe comes back, and lo and behold, the people are serving the idol, the golden calf. So that's, I guess, the general theme of the parsha. Like I said, there are hundreds of pages in the Talmud that are based on this week's parsha. So many of the verses are reanalyzed in a very deep and profound way, because this is the basis for the civil law. We have to decide how much into the law we want to go into, but we'll do a little bit. And of course, we're always looking for the mystical and spiritual and psychological application of everything we are going to study. So with that, the journey begins. Let's take a moment or two to say that something that we talked about in the past, but it's a general concept, and that is the categories of commandments. In other words, the question is, are commandments, are they supposed to make sense? Are we supposed to understand them? Or are we supposed to just accept? Right? So what's the preferred way to do the mitzvah? So one of the interesting things about the Torah is that the commandments themselves are categorized into three categories. And in Hebrew, we call them Edut, Chukim, Umishpatim. So Edut is testimonials, Chukim is decrees, and Mishpatim, which is the word for this week's Parsha, the name of this week's Parsha, is ordinances. But what it means is, it's logical law. And in the Torah, you have all three categories. So, for example, you have mitzvot that are testimonials. Testimonials means that we are performing this mitzvah to remember an event that happened in the past, to give testimony to an event that happened in the past. So, for example, you have the mitzvah of Passover, commemorating the past. We eat in the sukkah to commemorate the past. Even Shabbat is a mitzvah. In some ways, some aspects of Shabbat would be considered a testimonial. It's testifying to the fact, to the story of creation, that God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. So that's one category of commandments. Then you have another category of commandments, which we call mishpatim. This week's parsha, ordinances. They're logical, to the extent that the Talmud says, if the Torah was not given, we would learn certain laws and certain character traits from animals. In other words, within the natural world, you can observe certain phenomenon of morality, and you don't need the Torah to tell you that. So, for example, the Talmud says, if the Torah would not be given, we would learn modesty from cats. I don't have any cats, but I think presumably cats are very modest. And gezel and theft from ants. So again, I don't know what happens in the ant colonies, but apparently the ants don't steal from each other. Okay, so that's what the Talmud is saying. Talmud is saying, yes, there are mitzvot that are logical, to the extent that I'm not even sure you need the Torah to tell us about those commandments. So why does the Torah have to tell us about them is another story. But that just represents the second category. So we have the category of testimonials, things that testify about the past, remind us about the past. You have the category of mishpatim, ordinances, this week's parsha, which are very logical, as mentioned, to the extent that you don't even need the Torah to tell you that. And then you have chukim. Chukim is decrees. And decrees are mitzvot that we do because God told us to do. If God would not tell us to do it, we wouldn't do it. One example in this week's parsha is milk and meat. Most opinions believe that the prohibition against mixing milk and meat is a chok, is a decree. But in any case, so this week's parsha, even though it's primarily mishpatim, it's primarily the ordinance, it's primarily the law that is logical, there are some decrees in this week's parsha as well. There are also testimonials, because we also mentioned in the nutshell that there's also a mention of the holidays, and the holidays for the most part are testimonials. Okay, so we have three categories of mitzvot. Why do we need all three categories of mitzvot? So one way of thinking about it is that when we think about our relationship with God, our connection to God, we're actually trying, it's not just we're going to do what God wants. We're not servants of God. We are servants of God as well, but not only servants of God, we actually want a relationship with God. And the relationship means it has to really include all aspects of our personality. So if you want a practical metaphor, if you have a relationship, for the relationship to be wholesome, you need a few aspects. First of all, the two people in this relationship have to enjoy being in the relationship. They have to do things together that they both enjoy. If there's not going to be joy and pleasure in the relationship, then the relationship is lacking. So that's one category. You also have to remember. The past. So, for example, that's the institution of the anniversary. What is an anniversary? Anniversary is that after a while, a whole year of maybe mundane life, you say, you know what? On this date in the past, we had a very intense experience. We experienced intense, either a birthday or an anniversary of a marriage. So we experienced, or an engagement. So we had a very intense emotional experience. Let's celebrate that, not because we're looking for an excuse to buy cake or to buy jewelry or to buy flowers, But let's celebrate that. Let's try to reconnect to the perspective, to the energy, and to the feeling we had then and sort of relive it. That's also a very important part of the relationship. So you may take out the pictures from the wedding on an anniversary. You may do other things, but what you're doing is you're trying to go back to the past to recreate the experience, the intense experience you had in the past. That's also important. Okay. On the other hand, however, if you only have these two aspects, so you're commemorating the anniversary, you're engaged in activities that both of you enjoy. That's wonderful. That's a nice relationship. But on the other hand, it's limited because a relationship also has to have an important component called commitment. And commitment is, I'm committed to you, not because it makes me feel good, but it's about you. So every relationship has to have commitment. And commitment is expressed by the fact that there are certain things that I do in this relationship, not because I enjoy it. I'm doing it for you because you like it. And if you think about these three categories, if you're missing one of these categories, you may have a nice relationship, but the relationship is not complete. So I'm not saying we need the ratio. How to divide the ratio is another story. But here is a metaphor where a relationship has to have all three. And the same is true with our relationship with God. We also need these three things. So we have in this week's parsha, most of this week's parsha is Mishpatim. Mishpatim would be the laws that make sense. If it makes sense to us, then we want to do it because we're rational people. So we're very happy to do things that make sense. So that's the metaphor for the aspects of the relationship that we do because we both enjoy. Then you have the category of commandments that is called edut, testimonials. What is a testimony? It's the anniversary. We're celebrating the great kindness that God did to us in the past. Took us out of Egypt, took us to Sinai. That's our engagement. That's our marriage. It's our birth. Okay, we want to commemorate that, not because we're interested in the past as a historical information, which we are that as well, but we really want to recreate that feeling and that energy and that bond to God. Okay, very good. But then you have the aspect of chok. There are certain aspects, mitzvah that we do. You say, why are you doing this? So it makes no sense. If it makes no sense, I'm not enjoying it. I have to push myself to do so. So why am I doing it? I'm doing it as a commitment to Hashem. So that's why there are three categories of the commandments. And like I said, primarily this week's parsha is about the civil law, the logical law. But the reason why we have these aspects is because the relationship should be wholesome. So that's by way of introduction, just talking about the name of the parsha, even before we start getting into the parsha itself. So that's the first point. Comments, questions, jokes, disagreements, always welcome, as always. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, one more thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about is the order of the portion. I alluded to it earlier, and I think it's a general theme, and it's important to think about in general. So I think it's something worth talking about, and then we'll see how much time we want to talk about individual specific concepts within the civil law, which could be fascinating, especially if you're looking for the mysticism within the law, the philosophy within the law. We could be here literally forever doing that. Okay, so let's talk about the order of the parshas. As I mentioned earlier, last week's parsha, Yitro, which is the name of the parsha of last week's parsha, who is the father-in-law of Moses, came to the parsha is named after him for whatever reason. But the bottom line is we got the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, I started telling it to my kids because I like it, but I heard this from Dennis Prager. So he said, I forgot in what context he said it. He said that the 10 Commandments, he says, they're not called the 10 suggestions. They're called the 10 Commandments, which means it's not a suggestion, it's a commandment. You have to do it. In other words, the commandment represents, in a way, accepting God's will. When you say 10 Commandments, God shows up in Mount Sinai and tells us what to do and what not to do. Serve one God, don't serve idols, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, etc. Honor your parents. It's a commandment. And in fact, when the people prepare for the 10 Commandments, what do they do to prepare for the event at Sinai? So the Torah says in this week's parsha that the people that God comes to the people. Moshe tells the people that God wants to give the commandments, and the people say whatever Hashem says. And this is a very powerful Jewish phrase. You may have heard it. Whatever Hashem says, na'aseh v'nishma. Na'aseh v'nishma is Hebrew for we will do and we will listen. Listen means comprehend. Meaning it's an act of commitment. God tells us to do something, we do it. But doing is not enough. So there's the act of submission to the will of God, which is what we do. So it's acceptance, but it's also the concept of after following what we do, we also have to understand. But we don't wait to understand before we do. So that's the Jewish model. Na'aseh v'nishma, the Jewish religious model. Na'aseh v'nishma. We do, so that's submission. But the point is to then grow to understand. And they're both important. Right? But on the other hand, you're not going to wait. You're not going to say, I don't understand. I'm not going to do the mitzvah until I understand how it works. Somebody once asked the Rebbe, I'm happy to do mitzvah because Chabad started with mitzvah campaigns of stopping people on the street. And so you have a second, maybe roll up your sleeve, put on tefillin, take Shabbat candles. And some people said, well, maybe that's not the model. You have to take somebody to yeshiva, take them to the school, teach them the principles of the Torah, teach them the principles about God. And then after a few months or a few years when they graduate, you can explain to them you actually have to do the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is predicated on deep philosophical points, which seemingly the questioner says you have to add, you have to first understand. And the Rebbe gave a metaphor from medicine. He says, you go to the doctor and say, I have a headache or I have a footache, whatever it is. And the doctor says, here, I'm prescribing a medicine. Take the medicine. So what happens if I say, you know what? I'm happy to take the medicine. But first, I really want to understand how the medicine works. So first, I'm going to enroll in a medical school, study some biology, learn about how the body works, learn about how the medicine helps. And in 10 years after I graduate, if I have time, if I'm not distracted, and I figure it out exactly how it works, then I'll take the medicine. That's ridiculous because don't wait to get the benefit of the medicine until you understand how it works. On the other hand, just taking it without understanding is also lacking because you're a curious person. You should try to figure out what's happening within you if you have the time. So that same model is with the people in God. We're going to do Hashem's will, but then he says we're also gonna understand, and they're both important. And it's interesting because I told you that the Torah the story is out of order in the sense that last week's parsha we got the Torah. This week's parsha we have the civil law that followed the giving of the Ten Commandments, and most people would believe that this civil law actually is told to Moses when he's on the mountain, because Moses is on the mountain for 40 days. And then at the end of the parsha, the seventh reading, the final reading of the parsha, starts going back to tell us about the preparation for the event of the Ten Commandments. So it's out of order here. And it's interesting that last week's parsha, and it says that the people said, everything God said we will do. This week's parsha, it says the people said, everything God said we will do, and we will listen. So there's some changes, but that's really what's happening here in this week's parsha. So one way to think about it is we have the civil law sandwiched between two accounts of the giving of the Torah. And the question is, how come? Why isn't it in order where the end of this week's parsha, which talks about the preparation for the giving of the Torah, should have been last week? So obviously, if it's out of order, there's a very profound reason, which we're going to get to. Go ahead, doctor, please.
Rabbi, you talk about two steps. We shall do, and then we shall understand. And I'm wondering about a prelude step, which is the relationship, which is that if you don't have a solid relationship, you just may not do it. So how does the relationship, and maybe you said this before, for which I apologize because I was talking to a patient, how much does the relationship with the doctor, for example, or with God, determine whether we're going to do what's been ordered?
Okay, so I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine that for many doctors, the frustration is you give the patient a course of action, and they come back a year later and you see they didn't do it.
Exactly.
My doctor said you have to eat a big bowl of salad every day, and you have to run a mile every day. Do I do it? I don't know. Maybe yeah, maybe no. Right? So you can have all the wisdom in the world, the doctor and the patient. The doctor could convey all the wisdom in the world, but it may not actually happen, and it's a big frustration, I'm sure, in many fields. Unless you're a surgeon, you don't need the patient's agreement. You just can do whatever you want, put them to sleep and do whatever you want. But if you need some input from the patients, it could be very difficult. So I think today people know that, so they spend a lot of time with follow-up, and they realize that you could save a lot of time by even implementing certain things. But to our point, and that's what I'm getting to, when I say I will do, what I mean is submission and commitment. In other words, when I go to the doctor, listen, if I don't take the medicine, if I don't listen to the doctor's advice, it's at my expense. But when I go to the doctor, it does require a certain act of acceptance and submission, and say, you're the expert. I'm going to do what you tell me to do. If I don't do it, I'm harming myself. And that's true for the doctor, and it's true for God. In other words, you say relationship, but so that's the question. What is the foundation of our relationship with God? That's the question. Is it logical, or is it acceptance/faith? That's the question at hand. And that's why Jews don't have a straight answer to that question. So we can't say the story straight. We have to chop the story up because we have a complex relationship with that question. But that's really the question. I will do means the doctor tells me do it, I'm doing it. I don't understand how it works. Doesn't matter. You're the doctor, you're the expert, you know what's best, you have the experience. I'm accepting this on faith, and I'm going to push myself to do so, even though I'm not in the mood. That's acceptance, that's faith. Then, at a certain point, I'm not going to transform myself until I understand why this is helping me. So the doctor or the medical institution or whoever, I don't know who, the public, whoever's paying, if the public is paying for the medicine, then the public should pay for a public awareness campaign. You have to convince people that, for example, smoking is bad. And you have to show them and convince them and change their perspective. And then they'll stop, and then they'll have the healthy life, make the healthy life choice, hopefully. But that's a different model. That model would be it's not about submission and acceptance and faith. It's about internalizing and understanding. And now the question is, what's the foundation of our relationship with God? So faith or understanding? And that's an important question for any thinking person, because on one hand, you could say we're logical people, we want to understand. We want to understand anything we do. That's the superiority of the human being over other creations, over the animal, is that we can think abstractly, we could think about philosophical ideas, and therefore, if we have a relationship that we don't understand, it's not meaningful for us, really. So, relationship with God should be no different. We should try to understand why we do it and why it's important to us. On the other hand, how much can we understand? Our understanding is limited. God is infinite, we're finite. So at some point, you have to have some degree of faith and acceptance. So now let's go back and tie it all together. The model is you start with faith, you grow to understanding, and then you grow even further understanding that there's a limit. Then you reach the limitation of your understanding and you have faith in the infinite. In other words, first you say, first is acceptance. God wants me to keep the Torah. Like Dennis Prager says, it's the 10 Commandments, it's not the 10 suggestions. He has this funny story where he was in high school and he said, and a teacher said, okay, it's time to pray the afternoon prayer. And the teacher, and he says he's 15 and he says, I'm not in the mood. So he has this whole funny way of how the principal responded. He's like, who cares? No one asked you if you're in the mood. It's not about mood. God wants you to do what you do. It doesn't really matter if you're in the mood. That's beside the point. So that's the beginning. That's the foundation. Foundation is acceptance. That's the story of the giving of the Torah. God came down on Mount Sinai and said, this is my will. But you can't stop there. Then you have a whole parsha, 53 commandments, civil law. These things you have to understand. Mishpatim, you have to internalize it. You have to understand not just the commandments, but also understand the relationship with God. But you also have to realize that at the end of the parsha, we say, 1 second, you have to go back to faith. Because the human mind's ability to understand is limited. And you're going to reach the limit of your understanding, and then you have to say, there are certain things that we cannot understand. And then you go back to faith, you go back to acceptance, and that's why in the story, we go back to the people saying, we will do and we will hear. God, and we go back to the story of the preparation of the giving of the Torah, which is out of order, but we're going back to the idea of acceptance. So it's acceptance, understanding, acceptance. Because we start with faith, then we internalize the faith, and then we realize the limit of our understanding and say certain things we don't understand, we have to accept. So that's the model. That's the model for Jewish life, and that's how it's alluded to in this story. Go ahead, Doctor. I think you have.
My question is this, Rabbi, and I'm using an analogy of a tennis pro. The tennis pros, instructors, coaches, they have psychologists, they have all these people standing there when they're playing in these big tournaments. They work with them. They teach them the idea. They understand the idea. But if they're not actually physically there, like at a tournament, sometimes the person falls back because the pro isn't there sort of pointing it out all the time. Now, God isn't there saying, Menachem, remember, you should have said prayers this morning. By the way, Menachem, you have to remember this, you have to remember that. In other words, unlike a tennis pro, how does God fit into that kind of paradigm?
So I think the paradigm is once I understand it's good for me, I don't need God telling me to do so. Right?
Once a tennis player understands it's good for him, why does he need to have his pro at the event? Which they are. They're always there, cheering them on, making modifications. I mean, why doesn't the pro stay in New York? Why does he have to go to Australia?
That's a good question. I don't know enough about tennis, but but I think there are limits to understanding. At some point, the pro is here to push you beyond, right? Just do it. And in the same model with God, we also have, like I said, we start with the faith, then I understand, then I explore, and I want to do it. But even just because I want to do it, so that's internalization. But that internalization sometimes requires a commitment even after the internalization. Because yes, I'm committed to this thing, but do I want to do it? But right now, I may be distracted. Right? Let's say I take a job, and I'm very excited about this job. So I'll wake up 5 o'clock in the morning, take the first train out of Greenwich to go to my job. I'm very excited about it, and I internalize the vision of the company. I really want to do it. I don't need the boss forcing, saying, "Oh, if you don't come, I'm going to quit. I'm going to fire you." Right? I'm very motivated on my own. On the other hand, there are going to be some times which, even if I have all the internalization in the world, where it's cold and it's snowy and I'm tired, and I want to stay in bed. And then I say, you know what? I'm going to get out of bed because I committed to this. And I committed to this means right now I don't want to do it, but I'm committed. And if I'm committed, I'm going to push myself. And that's the coach, and that's the acceptance, and that's the person who would say that is commitment beyond the understanding. If you see what I'm saying. A funny story in yeshiva when we were like 15, 16. So the way it works is that the younger you are in yeshiva, the more they supervise things like attendance. And then when you get like 16, 17, 18, there's basically very little supervision for attendance because they assume you're adult and mature enough and motivated enough to show up on your own. So when you're in that sort of twilight zone, sort of between 16 or 17, and you're sort of starting to taste the taste of freedom where nobody's standing over your back, making sure you show up, then it becomes a question where I'm tired now. It's 2:00 p.m. I'm tired. Should I study Torah because that's the schedule of the day and I'm supposed to do that now? Or should I go take a nap? And if I nap, I'll be able to study better in an hour from now. But on the other hand, you have a study partner, you have the yeshiva, you're committed. So push yourself, but I'm going to come. I'm not going to study enough. And that's a dilemma. And that dilemma is in your life right now, what is more important to you? Are you trying to internalize the teachings? Then better take a nap because you'll be able to study better. But if you're trying to express commitment, then push yourself and do it when it's difficult. And which one is the right path? There is no answer to that. Both are important, right? You can't just study when you're tired, and you can't skip and you cannot have any commitment. But I'm just trying to show that even if you're enjoying it, at sometimes you say, you know what, I'm not in the mood, but I'm going to push myself. And that push myself is a commitment. And commitment is different than internalization, which is I really feel like I really want to do this right now. And if you think about this, like I said, every relationship, you're going to have elements of both. I'm here because I enjoy it. Took my kids to the park because I enjoy it. But on the other hand, sometimes I don't enjoy it. So that means I'm not going to do it if I don't enjoy it. No, you committed, you push yourself, right? So you have both those elements. Okay, we have a few minutes left to start thinking about civil law. I'm just trying to think about what is something that we should talk about. If anyone has any preference from the things we mentioned in the nutshell or things that you heard in general, that's okay. Please share. Otherwise, we'll just maybe pull one thing out of the hat and use that as a case study. Okay, what I want to do is I want to open up some of the verses of the Torah, and it's not very relevant today, this specific example, because it talks about torts with animals, and today we're not running around with animals as much, at least not if you live here, maybe if you live out in the West. But just to think a little bit about how the Torah conveys its laws, and how the Talmud asks certain questions and tries to derive certain patterns. And of course, we're going to do a few minutes on what the spiritual application of that is. So we're going to try to do a little bit of biblical analysis, in other words, analyzing the verses and see the disagreements in the Talmud that emerge from the verses, and we'll also try to look at the mystical interpretation. So that's the what is the word I'm looking for? That's the plan. We'll see how much we can execute. Give me a second, I'll try to pull it up. Okay, so just a little background, a little bit about the Talmud. So the Talmud is based on the Mishnah. They divide all of Jewish law into six categories, so six categories of law, and one category is nizikin, is torts, damages, torts. In the damages, you have tractates. If you ever heard of the Talmud, if you ever studied a little bit of Talmud, you probably heard these words. It's Aramaic. For Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Batra, Baba is a gate. First gate, second gate, third gate. And each gate is a section of Talmud. Some of them are the longest sections in the Talmud. And the laws of torts are divided into three gates. The first gate, Baba Kama, is laws of damages. The first gate discusses laws of damages, and it opens up with four general categories of damages. In the Torah, in this week's parsha, the Torah gives us four general categories. And if we had time, we can start thinking about why these are the general categories and why these capture all forms of damages are going to be included in one of those four. But in any case, you have shor, you have an ox, meaning an animal goring. You have bor, which is a pit. Someone makes a pit on the ground and on the sidewalk in front of your house, and someone else trips. So that's the second category. Fire is a third category. I light a fire, the fire travels and burns somebody else's produce or anything else. Third category. And the fourth category, it's not exactly clear what it means. It either means an animal eating or it means a person doing damages. We're not getting into that. But these are the four general categories, and there are many, many subcategories, but these are the general categories. In the category of the ox, so we're going to talk about the category of the ox, which is the ox gores. And the question is, what do you do when your ox gores? You see, when you have an animal, when you have a car, and you park your car on Greenwich Avenue and you go shopping or you go to eat lunch, you have a coffee, when you come back, you assume the car is going to stay where it was and your car didn't crash into any other cars. Because cars don't have a mind of their own, usually, unless AI changes that. Or unless you have a very old car. You turn right and it goes left. But in any case, in the olden days, forget about your car. Instead of a car, you had a donkey or you had an ox. And you ride to town and you park your ox in front of the coffee shop. And you come out and what do you see? You see that your ox scored the ox standing next to it. And now you're on the hook for $500 or $1,000 or $5,000. I don't know what livestock costs today. I'm a city boy. I apologize in advance. So the question is, what are you going to do? Like, who's responsible for this? So today we wouldn't have any problem. We solve the problem. We just make an insurance market and buy insurance and finished. Force everyone to buy insurance. So today we solve the problem. But the olden days, there was no sophisticated insurance market. Maybe it was too much of a burden to implement. There's no insurance. Who's responsible? So what the Torah is going to tell you is that this is the only category of you're not fully responsible. Because what are you supposed to do? You have to live your life. You have to go to Starbucks. You have to go do commerce. The animal has a mind for it. So we can't hold you fully responsible. On the other hand, what's not my neighbor's fault that my ox scored his ox. So what do you do? So what the Torah says, and it's a very unusual thing for the Torah. Maybe we can talk about why that is if we have the time. Torah says you pay half. The first two times you pay half. What does that even mean? Why do you pay half? One way to think about it is it's like insurance. You're spreading the pain. not that I'm liable. I'm spreading the pain, which is basically what the insurance market is doing. You basically spread the pain into a big group. So here you're spreading the pain into two. So you pay half. Problem is, once it happens 3 times, says the Torah, now this ox or this owner is warned. I should know that I have an ox in my flock that is causing damage. Now it's my responsibility to guard the ox properly. And if I don't, and if the ox scores somebody else, then I'm fully liable. That's what the Torah says. It doesn't say it as explicitly as I say it, but that's what the Torah says. We'll read the verses. We'll do a little bit of analysis. That's what the Torah is going to say. Of course, the question is, so that's something we're going to read about. And again, if we have time, we'll try to apply it to the spirit, to the human psyche as well. But let's see how far we go. Let's see what happens here. Let's try to have some fun. Nothing wrong with no, there's nothing wrong with trying to have fun. Okay, here we go. Verse 35. Earlier, there was other stories about an ox scoring a person and killing a person. We're not getting into that right now. So we're Exodus chapter 21, verse 35. If a man's bull strikes his friend's bull and it dies, they shall sell the live bull and divide the money received for it, and they shall also divide the dead body. Okay, without getting into the accounting of exactly what the case is, because there are different cases, not always. Okay, the bottom line is, it seems like here we're dividing the bull, we're dividing everything. So let's say I had an animal that was worth, whatever the case is. So you're going to divide both, and usually that would mean in some cases that would mean that I pay half, and therefore we derive from this you pay half. That's the first thing I want to say. Next verse, 36. Or if it was known that it was a habitually goring bull, oh no doubt, if it was known that it was a habitually, or it doesn't say habitually, it's bracket. It was known that it was a goring bull since yesterday and the day before yesterday, and its owner does not watch it. He shall surely pay a bull for a bull, and the dead body shall be his. In other words, the way we understand this, if it's a goring bull from yesterday, from before yesterday, the owner doesn't watch it, then you have to pay the full bull. You call it nezek shalem, complete damages. That's verse 35 and 36. There are literally, I don't know exactly how many because it's spread over a full tractate. I would say there are 30 pages in the Talmud that discuss these two verses. Literally 30 pages, which means I can't tell you how much commentary on the commentary on the commentary. Okay, fine. Let's start with the generalities, and then let's start with the generalities. There are really two differences between what we would call tam, an innocent bull, and a bull that is a goring bull because it gored 3 times. There are two differences. The first one I spoke about. The first one is that the first 2 times you only pay half. After the third time, you pay full. Okay, that's one difference. A more interesting difference is that when you have an ox that gores for the first 2 times, it's innocent. I only have to pay half the damage, but the damage is capped at the value of my ox. In other words, you can't go to the rest of my assets to collect, right? So let's have a scenario. Let's say my ox is worth $100, and your ox is worth $1,000, and my ox kills your ox. Now your ox is down to 0. It's not, but I'm just for the simple. So I owe you $500, half the damage. The problem is that my ox is only worth $100, and half the damage is $500. So what the Torah is telling you from the way it writes verse 35 is that you only pay, with an ox that's innocent, you only pay the cap. The cap is the value of the ox. So it would only be $100. In other words, we're protecting the owner of the ox. We're capping his liability. On the other hand, if the ox gored 3 times and then it gores again, in that case, not only do I have to pay the full damage, but if my ox itself is not worth the full damage, it doesn't matter. All my assets are liable. You can collect from any of my assets. These are the two major differences. Go ahead, Bonnie, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. This kind of reminds me of the current event of the mother who was sent to jail for what her son did, if you know what I'm talking about, with the son who committed that horrible mass shooting. Can you
Right.
comment on that?
So I saw the headline and I should not comment because I didn't read it, but against my better judgment, I'm going to comment. So I shouldn't, but I will. The Torah, this is the indirect damage in the Torah. It's much harder to make somebody responsible for indirect damage in the Torah than in the civil law, than in secular law. Okay, it's much harder to prosecute for indirect damage. But the pattern that you see here, if something is totally unexpected, then my liability goes down. Right? So it's not common for an ox to gore. So I only have half liability. Now, of course, there's the other side to the question. I don't know the case, but if you're going to leave a gun on the front on the dining room table, I don't know that she did. I don't know the case. Then that's negligence. So that would raise the liability. But the principle is that when I send my kid out to the store, do I have to make sure that my kid is not going to be a mass shooter? That if it's not, the less common it is, the less liable I am. If there's obvious signs, then you could get closer and closer to negligence, and then you have to, and then I would have an obligation to protect the community and to protect my child. Yes, but the Torah would be much harder to create that liability because of this concept that you have to live, and life is risky. Taking your ox to Greenwich Avenue is risky, and there would be no economy if we took zero risk, right? So you have to send your kids to the school. You can't hover over everybody all of the time. But the more common the risk is, the more responsible you are to protect against it, right? The more dangerous thing is in the way, like let's say a weapon, the more that would be negligence. So the short answer is, and this is, I'm giving you advice whenever anyone asks you a Talmudic question, the short answer is it depends. So that's the short answer. But just the case of the reason why it was interesting, because the case of the Goring Ox itself shows that, right, that because it's more common, because it's not common, therefore the liability goes down. For example, if my ox is standing on is parked in front of Starbucks, and on top of your ox is a big pile of grain, and my ox starts eating off the grain of your ox, I am liable 100% of the time from the first time and on, because that's a normal thing to be anticipated, that if an ox sees food, it's going to eat. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the idea of how common it is would help determine should I have anticipated what's going to happen, if that makes sense. And if I had to, then I'm liable. Okay, so that was just the two protections. That's why in 35 the Torah says, sell the ox and divide the money. What's sell the ox? We have to sell the ox. I'll write you a check, right? In 35, 35 was the ox that was not warned. So it says, if my ox, if it was not warned, didn't happen 3 times. If a man's bull strikes his friend's bull and it dies, they shall sell the live bull and divide the money received for it. Why sell the live bull? Why don't I just write a check? Which you could write a check, by the way, if you want to. The answer is they're saying you only pay from the value of the bull. Your liability is capped by the value of this animal, as opposed to if it's a gored if it's an ox that gored 3 times, I am liable for the entire damage, and all my assets are, you can collect from any of my assets. So that's the one thing I want to say. I'm going a little bit over today. I really apologize. If anyone has to go, don't hesitate to go off, and you're not going to offend me. Don't worry. But I'm going to try to do a little bit more, another few minutes. But don't. If you have to go. Don't be afraid of offending me. Go ahead, doctor.
Rabbi, it's a little bit of a strange question, but it's stirred up by your creative discussion. A great deal of the study of Torah involves the nuance of law and investigating it. And my question is, how many young people, after they finish yeshiva, can apply directly to law school and get in?
So it's interesting that law school is one of the schools in most law schools in the United States will actually take a yeshiva degree. So people can go straight from yeshiva to law school. If you want to go to medical school or
Oh,
even
that's different.
social work school, then you have to take other courses sort of to prepare you because yeshiva is very focused on Talmud. But most law schools in this country, even some of the Ivy Leagues, would just look at a yeshiva degree and say, okay, that would be considered enough to go into medical school, to go into law school. Oh, you're on silent. You're on mute.
And more than that, the question is, I would think they would be prepared to get a very high score on the LSAT.
I think so. I think you're right. I think it's training about reading text and analyzing and extrapolating. That's what you do in yeshiva. Yeah, correct. I never took the LSAT, so I can't speak directly, but that's my understanding. Okay, I want to talk about that a little. One more technical disagreement, and then that will take us into the psychology and into human behavior. I told you something that the Torah didn't say explicitly, but I'm telling it to you because the rabbis believe that that's the case. Okay, what did I tell you? I told you that once the ox scores 3 times, it becomes what they call warned. So look at verse 36. Or if it was known that it was a habitually goring bull, so it was a goring bull from yesterday and the day before yesterday, and its owner does not watch it, he shall surely pay a bull for a bull. Okay, pay the full bull. Okay, that's what it says, right? It says that if it gores 3 times, then you have to pay fully. The problem is it doesn't say it. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say 3 times. What it says yesterday and the day before yesterday. So the rabbis say what that means is today, because we're talking about the story that happened today. So it's today, yesterday, and the day before. That makes 3. So that means 3 times. Okay, fine. So we know from verse 36 that it has to be 3 times. But it doesn't say 3 times. It says today. It says from yesterday and the day before, which we derive from that it means 3 times. Okay, I asked you a question. This is a question in the Talmud. Going back to the Mishnah, this is a very early disagreement. What happens? One opinion says, if an ox scores on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, it becomes a gored ox. It becomes a warned ox. Now it's called mu'ad. It's warned. Now it's got to pay full damage. That's the closest scenario to what the Torah says. Now the question says, what happens if it didn't gore on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday? But on Tuesday, it gored 3 times. Am I a warned ox or not? Okay, so here's a disagreement in the Mishnah. One opinion says, no, the Torah says today, or implies today, yesterday, and the day before. You have to have 3 over 3 periods of day. 3 gorings over 3 days. I mean, you can have Sunday and the next Sunday and the next Tuesday. That's fine, but it can't be in the same day. The other one says no. If 3 gorings over 3 days makes you fully liable, makes you warned. If you bring it closer together, then the animal is even more violent. 3 gorings in 1 day, for sure you're considered a warned ox. So that's the question. Do the 3 gorings have to be over 3 days or not? And the answer to say it does, the reason to say it does, is because, so this is very interesting. I would love to hear if anybody has an opinion on this. Like, what do you think? You think that you should only be considered a ox that gored if you gore on 3 separate days, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, or whatever, any 3 days? Or do you feel that if the ox scores at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock, it should be considered an ox that gored? If anybody has an opinion on this matter, I would love to hear. Bonnie, go ahead.
I mean, I would think that speaks to how predictable the ox's behavior is. And so if the ox is doing something unexpected in 1 day and he does it 3 times, I think it would still be considered unexpected.
Right. I agree with you. I agree with you that it could be just that it's having a bad day. Right? The ox had a bad day. It's not a pattern. It's not a pattern. Right? So that's one opinion. So that's I agree with you I'm pretty sure that's the halacha, that's the law. Right? So the logic for this opinion would say to become a quote unquote a violent ox, you need more of a pattern. So you were talking about the aspect of the owner knowing about it, but I'm saying, what happened to the ox? Did the nature of this ox change? This ox become a violent ox? So if I send my kid to school and he breaks everything, okay, it happened. He didn't sleep last night. But if you do it every single day, so then this is a pattern of behavior. Then this becomes a habit. then you could say the habits change. By the way, you can also undo the habit. And that's the same disagreement. How long does it take to undo the habit? One opinion says, as soon as kids start playing with the ox and the ox is calm, he's no longer violent. Other people say, no. They have to play with the ox 3 days in a row, right? You have to create a pattern of calm behavior. But it's the same question. The question is, how long does it take to classify this ox as a Goring ox? And basically, it's about making habits. It's about habits. And could you say that this ox now, just because it did something 3 times, do you say, is it predictable? Would you think that it will continue doing so? And here, what the Torah is saying, at least the opinion that says it's got to be over 3 days, both to establish the ox is a Goring ox, but also to return to its old state of a calm ox, of a non-Goring ox, of an innocent ox. So one opinion would so the logic that would say you need the days, which is, by the way, the more simple interpretation, because the Torah does say it today, yesterday, the day before, right? So there's 2 opinions in the Talmud, but we know the simple reading of the verse really pegs those gorings to days, and that's telling you the power of habit, and that's telling you the power of negative habit, but also to counter that, the power of positive habits. And there's so many specific laws of the Talmud about this Goring ox, that if you really think about it for a minute and you apply it to the psychology of human behavior, I don't know if psychology is the right word, but behavioral science of how people behave, you will see that there's many parallels between the concept of fighting negative habits and creating positive habits. And there is no way to fight negative habits other than creating a positive one. That's the best way. I think the science knows that today. Creating positive habits is the best way to fight the negative ones. And I think, like I said, this is just a taste and a sampling. I'm 10 minutes over, so I'm going to stop. But we can really do this for a long time, of getting into the laws and getting into the, first of all, the practical, philosophical ideas of the laws, which we did in the beginning. And then you get a little bit to the behavioral side and the human psychology side. And this can keep us busy for a long time. So this is just a taste. Come back next year, same time, same place, and we'll continue our journey. Thank you all for joining. Go ahead, Doctor, please.
I just want to end with a joke because you like jokes. And
I need a good joke. I promise.
my joke is inspired by you.
Go ahead.
Call a fear of being gored by a bull agoraphobia.
Okay, I'm in. I have to write that down in my notes for next year. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Great to get together again. Thank you.